no such thing as a vote that doesn't matter. It all matters. And after we have achieved historic turnout in 2008 and 2012, especially in the African-American community, I will consider it a personal insult, an insult to my legacy, if this community lets down its guard and fails to activate itself in this election. You want to give me a good send-off? Go vote!
Good morning and welcome back to AM Joy. I'm Tiffany Cross. It's been a long 4 years since President Obama gave that stirring speech to the Congressional Black Caucus. As he said, black voters turned out in a huge historic way for the first black president. But will Obama's right-hand man, Joe Biden, be able to replace that kind of engagement? Support for the Democratic candidate among black men has steadily decreased since 2008, down 13 percentage points in 2016. And we got to talk about it. 13% of black men voted for Donald Trump, more than 3 times as many as black women. And keep in mind that black men are consistently 5% of the electorate compared to black women who comprise 7 or 8% of the electorate. Even as black women are finally being acknowledged as the backbone of the Democratic Party, evident in Joe Biden's pick of Kamala Harris, black men are too often overlooked as a voting bloc and too often viewed as a monolith in ways that white voters never are. The Democratic Party is finally centering black women. Can it center black men in the same way? Joining me now to talk about this and more is the amazing Brandon Marshall, NFL wide receiver and co-founder of Project 375, Steve Phillips, host of the podcast Democracy in Color and author of the amazing book Brown is the New White. If you haven't read it, you should. Ellie Mistal, justice correspondent for The Nation. I love me some Ellie. And Dr. Jason Johnson, my friend and nemesis, political contributor for MSNBC and The Griot. Thank you guys for joining me. Brandon, I want to start with you because you and I have talked a bit offline about this and your interest in the voting process. So something I find interesting that you and I have spoken about, you know, you hear a lot in the media of, you know, people talking about college-educated white men, non-college-educated white men. And look, black voters disaggregate in the same way, but we're usually stuck with the moniker of the black vote, which, you know, is kind of an antiquated notion at this point. But to drill down even more in that, when it comes to black men, you still don't see the same cute little colloquialisms or interest even. So when you see people venture into West Virginia, into coal miner country, or NASCAR, to talk to NASCAR dads, and you just wonder, I mean, who's out here talking to the dudes on the block? So I want to ask you, as you've delved into this work, who is talking to the dudes on the block, and what are things that the black men want to hear, issues that maybe people haven't been politically engaged, but right now they're politically engaged? What are some issues they care about, and how do we bridge this gap?
Yeah, so I think that there are people on the block talking to our men of color. So I don't want to discredit the work that they've done and they've done for years. But I think we need more people like myself, other athletes, other entertainers, other politicians pounding the pavement in our neighborhoods. It's simple. There's no representation and there's no education. There's no one in the office that looks like us. There's no one on television that looks like us. We need to see ourselves in the system, and I think that's a good place to start. When we talk about some of the issues that we may need to address or some of the things that may concern us, black men, we're looking at not civil rights issues, but we're looking at just fundamental rights, okay? Education, police brutality, fixing that first before we can even dive into who the candidates are, why they matter, where they stand on certain things. And like for me, this is a process. I told you this offline. There's so much I don't know about the system. But now we're in this interesting time where, you know, the power is at the ballot box. We know that, but it's scary approaching it. So I need to know how to register. I need to know what to expect when I go to the ballot box. These are fundamentals. A lot of us are so overwhelmed with the process because we think it's bigger than what it is that we don't even get involved. So it has to start with education and representation.
Brandon, I love what you said. You know, I don't know a lot about sports, so I love our conversations because we can both help each other learn new spaces. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Steve, I want to ask you, so much of what we know about politics is filtered through the media, but there's a polling firm, Hit Strategies, run by Terrence Woodbury, and they have some really interesting information about what issues black men care about. And so they discovered that men over 50, racism and discrimination is a huge issue, obviously. Healthcare follows that, and then economy and jobs. So again, we don't see a lot of this conversation happening in mainstream media, and I think that frequently filters how candidates and campaigns engage with these electorates. I think that's why you saw so much during the election cycle of people bragging about who could win Trump supporters and who does great in red states. And you had to remind them, hey, you're running as a Democrat. Talk to how you can win this space and how you can win blue states. So how do we help these campaigns and candidates start to center people of color, but particularly black men, and I would even say Latinx men, center men of color? Your book, Brown is the New White, talks about the changing demographic, so I'm particularly interested in your thoughts on this.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. I think that the significance of him picking Kamala, and you even see in the debrief around how he got to the choice, it wasn't a given that he was going to choose a woman of color. And so this notion that the most important voters are the white swing voters in the Midwest, the white swing voters, period, is a very strong and fundamental proposition within politics still. So for him to actually take the step to choose a woman of color validates that he understands that the voters that he needs are people of color. So for all the obsession of the past 4 years around chasing the white swing, the white working class voter, the Trump voter, it was a black vote that fell off the cliff in 2016, dropped to an almost 20-year low. So if African Americans had come out in a significant way, the way they came out for Obama, Clinton would have won at that time. And that gets into the quality of the agenda, the progressiveness of the agenda. And are you worried about offending people who might be more moderate in their politics? Or are you worried about not inspiring people who want to be motivated and who are calling for far-reaching change? There's a profound racial wealth gap in this country, and that's tied to this 401-year legacy of slavery and discrimination. And so is the administration, are the candidates acknowledging that? Are they looking at saying that we are going to actually examine, as they began to discuss during the racial reckoning after George Floyd's murder, this historic systemic discrimination piece to begin to rectify that? You start to speak to that, that gets at those core underlying economic issues, but that you have to be willing to focus on that grouping and not be so afraid of alienating the Trump supporters who are never going to come to us.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I know the black voter turnout was down in 2016, but I think anytime we talk about that, I wrote a whole book about it, that we have to say GOP-led voter suppression and Russian election interference that specifically targeted black voters also aided in depressing the black vote. But I want to go to you, Dr. Johnson, because you are a professional political scientist. You love to remind everybody of your PhD every 15 seconds. So let's go to you
Every once in a while, yeah.
Let's go to you on how to engage this very important demographic. You wrote a piece for the Griot where you talk about the black men on the Joe Biden campaign. How important is it that staffers look like the communities they serve? And I just, I'll add on to this that a lot of campaigns and candidates do outreach to black voters, but they do it on the low. They don't want people to know they're appealing to black voters because they're afraid of alienating other sets like Steve talked about. So talk about the importance of black people in the campaign, but also what else needs to happen to center black men as a voting bloc.
Yeah, Tiffany, this is extremely important. And one of the things I talked about in my piece, and you and I have talked about this, is we have our NASCAR dads, we have our soccer moms, we've talked about basketball dads, right? Yeah. That's the kind of working class guy. He works at Verizon. He may have a college degree. He works at UPS. He gets off work. He goes, plays ball, may take his kids home from school. These are the men whose experiences with criminal justice have been more like George Floyd than Christian Cooper. And very few campaigns are talking to these men. There are organizations out there right? There's the Black Male Voter Project in Georgia. They reached out. They got 50,000 additional black men to vote in the Georgia primary this year by mail. There are local activists, local organizers who need to get money. And when I've talked to black men out there, West Bellamy in Charlottesville and Mondale Robinson in D.C. and Virginia, what these guys tell me is, if you want to get black men out to vote, you got to put black candidates on that they trust at the local level. They may have their skepticism about Joe Biden. They may have their skepticism about Senator Harris. But what they're not going to be worried about is their local mayor, their local police chief, the guy who can really speak to their issues. And what I also want to say is this, and this is excellent work. I like what Brandon was talking about before about being, educated and learning more. You've got LeBron James out there saying, hey, we should open up the Staples Center as a voting place. You have the Atlanta Hawks saying, hey, we should open up Phillips Arena as a voting place. There are black male validators out there that can open up spaces for black men to vote. And if these national campaigns were willing to spend the money, you could see those Obama numbers in 2008 come back in 2020.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. LeBron James also gave a significant financial contribution to voters of Florida who, as you know, are being suppressed through the new poll tax after Amendment 4, which tried to suppress people with felony convictions from voting. They have to pay all their court fees before they can vote. And so LeBron put big money down in Florida to help leapfrog that. So I can't say enough about black men validators. That's going to be hugely important, which brings me to you, Ellie, because as we have Senator Harris as the vice presidential nominee, I think this will significantly impact the Biden ticket. What role do you see black men playing in supporting her? And I want to be clear, when I say that, 13% of black men voted for Trump, black men overwhelmingly vote the Democratic ticket. I think a part of this is GOTV getting out the vote from people who may not typically be politically engaged. So talk to us about what you think the rest of the campaign looks like as it relates to engaging the black men voting bloc.
I'm so glad that you level set there correctly, Tiffany, because we have to remember that 8 out of 10 black men are going to vote for the president who show up to vote. The only reason that we're here is that we're struggling to capture the 9th black man because 2 out of 3 trifling white men are going to vote for the bigoted, misogynist president, right? Our bench has to play like stars because a majority of white men are going to play like scrubs, all right? Now, with that said, the Democratic Party does not make this easy because what we have, when you look at what an average African-American experience is like in this country, it is to be predated upon, right? And not just by American cops or by Confederate lawn jockeys, but every white woman in this country knows that she can take my job or my freedom or my life with some fake tears on a phone call. So what is the Democratic Party offering to those men who are worried about this in this moment, right? For too long, it has been pull up your pants. Don't seem too angry in public. Like that's, you talk so eloquently about what LeBron James is doing, but is he speaking at the convention? Nah. Mayor Stop and Frisk is speaking at the Democratic National Convention, right? So the Democratic Party does not make it easy for us to get, again, that 9th out of 10 black guy to get involved. And I think Jason had exactly the right point when I'm
I knew this was going to happen. Right? Ellie gets so fired up, he freezes. He burns the internet. Ellie, you froze at us for but that's okay, brother. We heard everything you said, so thank you. Brandon, I actually want to go back to you for a second, because Ellie did make a good point about what LeBron James is doing and how he isn't really included at all in the Democratic National Convention. And I think there is an interesting intersection between sports and activism. Like we've gone from Republicans buy shoes to no, like we are fed up and we're going to be active voices here. What are your fellow athletes in the NFL, the NBA? What does political activism look like in your crew?
It's non-existent. We don't participate. We don't talk about it. So the last couple of months, the reason why I'm so passionate about learning and being transparent and honest there is because I've seen professional athletes that I grew up with, that I played with, shared the same locker room with, come out and say, I don't know how to vote. I don't know how to register. There was a big group chat with the University of Miami, all their star players that ever came through there. And you have legends, Hall of Fame players saying, well, what happens when I get to the ballot box? And I think that's where we need to start. We need to educate people like myself on that process. Like, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There was one white family in our neighborhood. We were from the poorest county in all of Pennsylvania. We weren't talking about voting. We were just trying to survive.
Right.
Like, you're telling me about voting? I'm just trying to get some food in my stomach. So I really think that for my demographic and people like myself, we need to educate ourselves, because the power is in the ballot box. But when you start talking about electoral college and does my vote matter, that's when you lose us. So I love what you guys are doing. You know, we just need more access to that. And I think it starts with the LeBron James. I think it starts with me. I think it starts with Colin Kaepernick saying, hey, guys, not only vote, but here's a book to read, or here's a show to watch, right? Like, we need you on this show all the time doing exactly what you're doing. But we need to support you. We need to have your back. And we need to have LeBron on this show. We need to have Colin on this show. And that's what's going to get the job done for my demographic.
Well, if LeBron wants to come talk to me, I am wide open to that conversation. So thank you for that.
Loves you. Everyone loves you. Of course he's going to come on.
Thank you for that plug, Brandon. I appreciate that. Brandon's going to be back with me later because you brought up something that we're talking about. But I just want to say quickly that I totally hear what you're saying. We're asking men to believe in a system that has harmed them. And we need to tell people we're not asking you to believe in the system. We're asking you to believe in you, brother. So stay strong, and thank you for that note. Thank you, Steve Phillips, Ellie Mistal, and my friend, you know I have to give you a hard time, Jason Johnson. You brought it home for us.
Always.
Next up, millions of Americans